Hey guys, Jay Mamie here. Just wanted to give you a little bit of a message that I think would be very impactful as you continue to battle these invisible enemies that we've been talking about these last couple of weeks. You know, many of you now have had a chance to download and watch the live stream webinar that I held a few weeks ago titled Battling Invisible Enemies. And now we're starting to ask me questions about that, and I appreciate the questions. By the way, I appreciate the feedback on the Facebook wall, on LinkedIn, everywhere that you guys are on my Facebook page. You guys are on my fan page. You guys are also putting great reviews and testimonies. I encourage you to keep it coming because it really does inspire me to know that I'm making an impact in the lives of many of you out there. I believe that is the calling on my life, and I'm grateful to know that I am following pursuit. But one of the questions that I keep asked is, how do you defend yourself, Jay, if you are battling an enemy that you cannot see, you cannot touch, you cannot smell, you cannot taste, you can't determine when the enemy is around, there's no real way to find that the attack is forming. How do you defend yourself against an enemy like that, against a very crafty, invisible enemy? By the way, the enemies that I'm talking about aren't physical enemies. I'm talking about mental enemies, emotional enemies. I'm talking about enemies of despair, discouragement, depression, fear, anxiety, stress, pressure, doubt, disbelief. These are all invisible enemies that can cripple you in your pursuit of an achievement that you're after, or just living your life. Right? So one of the questions is, how do you defend yourself? Let me give you the answer to that. Number one, there's many ways to defend and to create what I call a defense system against an attack, an attack from one of these invisible enemies. And one of them is to make sure that you are aware of when you are the weakest. What is your point of vulnerability? You see, if you are waging war, if you are in a military operation, all military operations, when they strategize what they're planning on doing, the first thing they look at is, where are we the weakest? Where are we the most vulnerable for an attack? Then they shore up that defense. They make sure that they stack all the odds against the enemy having any success. They fortify that region where they are weakest and where they are most vulnerable. It will diminish the attack if there is one, or it'll cause the enemy to think twice before it comes to attack. Same thing for you and I. You have to know what point, where you are most vulnerable. Where are you most weakest? Where could you be susceptible for an attack, a blindsided attack from one of those invisible enemies? Let me give you an example. I was chatting with a guy who just came back from a convention. He was all fired up. The convention was a very exciting convention. It was a very life-changing, motivating, inspirational event. Lots of people there. And he says to me that he walked away discouraged. And I said, why'd you walk away discouraged? And I knew where he was going with it, because he wanted to be one of those people that was recognized on stage. He felt that he had done enough activity, enough production to be recognized, and he walked away discouraged. And I said, why did you walk away discouraged? And he said, because I just felt like I could do more, I could be more. And I said, man, you're going through this process of discouragement because you left yourself wide open. You walked into an arena where now, if you didn't beforehand shore yourself up, in other words, create a defense system that you knew walking in there, that if I don't get the recognition that I'm supposed to get, or if I don't get the promotion, or if I don't have the accolade that I've been fighting for, that I'm not going to allow myself to get discouraged because I can just focus on the next one. I told my son the same thing. I said, when you study for your exam, if you don't pass it, don't get discouraged. Don't allow yourself to be attacked that way. Study harder and you'll pass the next one. Know when you're most vulnerable. You are most vulnerable when you want something badly. You're most vulnerable when you aren't thinking about it. You're most vulnerable when you aren't working on personal development, working on yourself getting better. You become then the weakest point. And the weakest point will always be the one that the enemy attacks first. Find out what your weak point is. Find out where you're most vulnerable. Find out when you're most vulnerable. You know, there's times throughout the day or the course of the week, but on a daily basis, where you are the most vulnerable. When is that? Usually in the morning. Right? Usually if you're out during the day and you're pressured to perform, or you're in the middle of a group and everybody else is sort of having a negative day and you're susceptible to that, well, guess what? That's also going to put you in a place of vulnerability and susceptible for an attack. Know when you are most vulnerable. Know where your weak points are. Work on those. Create the proper defense system. And I can promise you those invisible enemies will have a very hard time getting at you. Hope that helps.